Democrats just made a move that could backfire in the worst possible way. They thought dragging this to the Supreme Court would box Trump in. But here's what they might have actually done. They might have handed him the actual legal framework to expand federal authority. This is a post here from Ryan Fournier. The White House is reportedly considering deploying Marines to Chicago after Supreme Court of the United States blocked the National Guard. If you're not aware, there was a 6-3 decision where the Supreme Court blocked the deployment to Chicago. Now, the Supreme Court had already ruled that President Donald Trump could send the National Guard into places like New Jersey, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, D.C. So you've got to rub your head and wonder why they're saying no to Chicago. The radical left and activist judges won't stop our president from restoring law and order. Do it. Our ICE agents must be protected at all costs. This could get really freaking Western really quick, and I want to walk you through how this whole thing works. Smash a like and subscribe. I've got a clip that is going to blow your mind. It's going to confirm everything. Look, I want to say first and foremost, I'm not here to tell you what to feel about this. I'm here to read the roadmap. And when you understand how federal authority actually operates in the American legal system, this whole thing starts to look very different. So let me explain the mechanism, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's the way I operate with the news here. Here's where this gets really interesting. The moment you take this fight to the Supreme Court and frame it as state officials blocking federal operations, you no longer are arguing politics. You're arguing federal supremacy. And in that legal category, the question isn't should the federal government be allowed to do this? The question becomes, what authority does the federal government have when its operations are obstructed? And this is where we roll into a little bit of backstory, a little bit of context with the mayor of Chicago. I'm going to show you this clip. It's going to blow your mind. And he is really pressing his luck.
Democrats are telling us they want a rematch of the Civil War.
The right wing in this country wants a rematch of the Civil War. I want that to sit in right now, because the President of the United States of America has declared war on the people of Chicago and people across America.
We don't want a rematch. The president hasn't declared war on anyone, but they've declared him public enemy number one.
It is time to recognize that while you thought the enemy was the immigrant, or you thought the enemy was the trans person, or you thought that the enemy was the black folk, it is not any of those people on the list. It is the old white Nepo baby that is sitting in the White House.
The President of the United States has the authority to protect federal facilities, federal officers, other members of the, federal employment that are deployed to Chicago. You're seeing right here what kind of a combat zone that we're seeing in Chicago. This is an actual city in the United States. This is not Iraq or Afghanistan. This is Chicago. And apparently these cartels, Tren de Aragua, this Venezuelan cartel, has started putting bounties out on the heads of ICE agents to a tune of $10,000. Now, I've got to ask you this question. Do you want a president that will protect federal property, federal officers, or do you want someone that will just turn a blind eye? Because it seems like that's what's happened into Chicago for too long. And it seems like the mayor of Chicago has allowed this to happen. Because this is a very fundamentally based question. And it has a very different answer than what I believe the Chicago residents want and what the mayor of Chicago wants. Because the answer starts in the most boring procedural place you can imagine. We just want peace. These people want to be able to walk to the gas station, walk to the grocery store, go pick up their newspaper without getting attacked. And step one in this whole thing is pretty straightforward. Protect federal property and federal personnel. Federal buildings, ICE agents that are doing their jobs, federal operations that need to function. That's the foundation. Because once the court, the Supreme Court, affirms that principle, and it's hard to imagine them saying the federal government can't protect its own operations, the next question becomes unavoidable. Now, I want to show you this. This clip could very well lay the groundwork for what is coming to Chicago.
Initially recently said, look, I'm trying to enforce the laws with ICE agents, with federal law enforcement, and I can't do it, so I need to call the National Guard. But the statute says the president has to be unable to enforce the law with regular forces. What does regular forces mean? We don't know. The Supreme Court has never decided that question before yesterday. The Supreme Court now says regular forces means you have to try with the regular armed forces first before you can bring out the National Guard. So
you have to try with the regular armed forces first before you bring out the National Guard. This is John Yoo. He's at the University of Berkeley, California. Okay. So he's not exactly probably a Trump fan.
So the unintended consequence here might be that the president is going to have to call the 82nd Airborne or the Marines or the 101st Airborne Division, as, for example, President Eisenhower did after Brown versus Board of Education in the South to enforce desegregation. President Trump might have to do that first in order to protect those federal buildings, those ICE agents. And then if they fail, he can then call out the National Guard.
Got it. J.B. Pritzker, the governor in the state of Illinois, is saying this. Today is a big win for Illinois and American democracy. This is an important step in curbing.
Why would the governor of Illinois be celebrating the Supreme Court preventing a president of providing safety in a city within his state? What do they not want the president of the United States to know about Chicago? Chicago's got some problems. This is getting ugly quick.
The Trump administration's consistent abuse of power and slowing Trump's march toward authoritarianism. That's purely political. I think the president has obviously tried to work within the framework of the law as his legal eagles have seen it. 15 seconds or so. What happens from here? And I guess,
of course, injecting a lot of heated political rhetoric into this.
Yeah.
But what's going to happen? Trump will, of course, now have the right to go to the Supreme Court on the full merits. As you said, Kevin, this is just preliminary. He may be able to get the full court to reverse this preliminary decision. But second, and I think more worrisome, is the Supreme Court is essentially inviting President Trump to send regular armed troops and deploy those to Chicago and Los Angeles before he can send the National Guard. I think
is the Supreme Court daring Donald Trump to send Marines, send the 82nd Airborne? You heard it there from the professor and lawyer and professor at Berkeley. If local officials won't maintain order around these federal facilities, these detention facilities, if state authorities refuse to cooperate with federal law enforcement, who ensure the federal government can actually function, the answer constitutionally is the federal government itself. Now, people keep bringing up Eisenhower and Little Rock, and it's just a historical reference, but that's not why it matters here. What matters is the legal precedents. When federal authority is obstructed by the local authority, the constitutional framework treats it as a supremacy clause issue. It's not about drama. It's about category. Federal law, federal operations, federal supremacy. And here's the part that should make Democrats really nervous. When you ask the Supreme Court to rule on this, you're not just asking them to stop Trump. You're asking them to define the scope of federal authority in these situations. So the backfire isn't Trump gets unlimited power. The backfire is much more specific. Trump gets to argue with legal backing that he's not escalating for political reasons. He's preserving federal function. And if the court agrees, if they say yes, then buckle up. That's all I got to say for Chicago. This is not a small precedence. This is structural. It'll apply nationwide. Now, nobody should want this to escalate. Nobody should want troops in the streets or constitutional crisis. But if you're being honest about how the legal system works, Democrats may have just opened the door to the exact outcome they were trying to prevent. And if Donald Trump gets the endorsement of the Supreme Court just before the new year, 2026 is going to get a little Western. Drop your read in the comments. I want to know what you're seeing. I want to know your thoughts on this. And do you think the president has the authority to deploy National Guard, deploy federal troops to these cities around the United States to maintain good order and discipline? And just basic safety here in the United States for legal residents. Thanks a lot. I'll see you in the next one.